Okay, so we're live. So hi everyone, it's a pleasure to have you all here and on Zoom and on the live feed as well. So I'm Ovidiu Babes, and it's a pleasure for me to host the Fusion Talks event, the second day of the Fusion Talks event on behalf of the Qolony Association. So just a few words to introduce the panel today. So yesterday we had quite an interesting talk, quite interesting talks, and we learned quite a bit about art and science generally. So we basically saw that art and science can be many things. So it can be a way of simply expressing oneself. It can be a way of just developing art and science themselves and to make them more humane, let's say. It can also be a wonderful tool to simply gain knowledge and understanding about the world we live in and we used to live in. And even kind of, it was unexpected for me at least, art and science can be a driving force for institutional and educational change as well. We've also learned, I think, that the usual labels of art and science being like a genre or a field or a discipline can be misleading, and I don't think they do full justice to the exploratory scope of art and science. So therefore, when these concepts fail us, we should, as Aristotle used to say, get down to earth, right? So for this, in this second day, we've imagined the Fusion Talks as a kind of inquiry into how art and science is actually made. So for this, we've invited 5 artists working at the crossroads between art, science, and technology, who will basically all share their insight tonight. So I'm delighted to have them on board. And first off, I'm going to present every one of them, and then I'm going to give the floor to each for them to present their work. So the first speaker is Jennifer Willet. Delighted to have you on board, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Jennifer is the director of the Incubator Art Lab in Canada, and also a professor at the School for Creative Arts at the University of Windsor in Canada. Our second speaker is going to be Frederic Deville. I hope I'm pronouncing it right.
That's correct. Hi, and thank you also for having me.
Great to have you on board, Frederik. He's a conceptual artist working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. And the focus of his works is like the concepts of inaudible, intangible, and invisible. He is fascinated by dark ecologies and invisible territories in digital and physical spaces. I very much look forward to your talk, Frederik. Then we're going to have Sabina Suru. Hi, Sabina.
Hi, everyone.
Sabina is a multimedia artist focusing on misplaced and forgotten objects, techniques, and stories. She has built a lot on the relationship between applied arts and scientific practices. I'm sure we're going to hear more about it from Sabina herself. The next speaker is going to be Nicole. She's an artist and a speculative designer.
Yes, that's correct.
Nice to have you here, Nicole. Her design explores plausible future products and scenarios based on the current developments and existing recent scientific knowledge. That sounds absolutely wonderful. And the last speaker for today is going to be María Castellanos. Hi, María.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on board, María. She's a visual artist and a researcher, and currently, if I'm not mistaken, a postdoc at the Felt project in Oslo, currently holding a Leonardo grant at the BBVA Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to have everyone on board. Just one small note: after all the talks, we're gonna have a performance being streamed live after the talks. A performance designed by Peter Gates. The performance is called Laser Trick. And Peter is, or Petru Pap, as he's also known, is an anthropologist and an experimental musician. So stay tuned till the end, because we're gonna end it in a pretty cool fashion. So just one just one last thing. Feel free for anyone watching us on Facebook or other streaming platforms, feel free to write down your comments or questions after each talk in the chat of the respective platform, and we'll do our best to pick them up and we'll ask the speakers to address your questions. So now we're going to have the presentations and followed by the Q&As. So the first speaker is going to be Jennifer. And Jennifer, I'm handing the floor to you. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm Dr. Jennifer Willet. I'm the director of Incubator Art Lab at the University of Windsor in Canada. I was founded in 2009 as an art and science research laboratory. And before that, I worked at Concordia University in Montreal. I've been working in the field of bioart, so that's art and biotechnology, for almost 20 years now. So I want to tell you a little bit about where I'm at and the lab that I've built as a functional space to produce this research, but also maybe as a creative expression. So I'm at the University of Windsor. Windsor is at the southernmost tip of Canada. We tip down into the United States just a little bit. It's in the heart of the Great Lakes ecological region. And it is also the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy. This is the view from the end of my street. I can see Detroit across the river. I have not been there in over 2 years since the pandemic. And in fact, my spouse used to work over there and had to quit his job because he was not an essential worker. So we're in this highly sort of a space with a lot of sort of tensions. It's a very makerly space. So Detroit and Windsor are sort of twin cities that are also the automotive manufacturing centers for North America. Both of these towns are the birthplace of unions within North America. So the makerly culture, the hands-on, the ability to take things apart and put them back together again is really part of the culture I'm working within. And so this is the environment of the School of Creative Arts. This is an old armory. So we're in a post-industrial town, a lot of economic challenges, a lot of unemployment, but also a lot of opportunity, right? Because the future is not yet defined here. And so one of the things that the University of Windsor has done is taken all of these historical buildings from the city and turned them into really amazing research and teaching facilities. So this is the old armory, which is a militaristic building, which they built a contemporary art center within the inside of it as like a second structure. So this is the building under construction. This is my first lab. It's Incubator Art Lab. It's in the main atrium. So if you walk through the front doors of the building, you're in this beautiful great hall, very historical contemporary architecture. You can look over to the side and you can see straight into the lab. The lab has a glass floor to ceiling wall, making everything that happens within the lab visible to passersby. The lab has also been designed in such a way that it has both laboratory as well as kitchen aesthetics. And it's very well known for its chandelier. So within this space, I conduct my research as a Canada Research Chair and a person who does biological arts research. I also have graduate students. Right now we have 3 MFA students who are specializing in bioart. And then I also teach the undergraduate bioart, contemporary art, and the life sciences class within this space. It is a BSL level 2 laboratory, so we can do procedures that are somewhat harmful to human researchers within that environment. It also means it's highly regulated. It's very hard to do workshops in this environment. In the last year, I was successful in receiving a grant from the Canadian Foundation for Innovation to turn the lab into a multimedia theater. So the goal is to be doing live theatrical performing arts events in that space. So we can merge performance art or performing arts with biotech procedures and do them for live audiences as well as virtual audiences online. We are currently installing theatrical lighting, sound equipment, multimedia equipment that allows for cameras to be in the ceilings and in the sterile hood, for example. I've since built a second facility that we just opened this year during the pandemic. This is Incubator Art Lab Studio. It's about a block down the street from the art department. This is intended as a storefront community engagement space. So a lot of my practice also involves working with audiences who think they're going to be audiences, but actually become participants into work. I do a lot of hands-on bioart workshops, and I'm really interested in engaging non-artists and non-scientists into this discourse. So we made this very visually appealing storefront studio space that allows for me to build my sculptural artworks for my own practice, but also to host workshops and events for a general public. So unlike the Under Lab, I can have school-aged children in this space because it is a BSL Level 1 laboratory. You can see that we put a greenhouse into the studio. The greenhouse is actually the lab, and we needed something with doors so that when the doors are closed, we can be in the studio, we can have coffee, we can have meetings, but when the doors are open, that recertifies the space as a laboratory environment and allows us to do the type of lab work that we might need to do with audiences in that space. So as you can see, I've become highly institutionalized over the last 20 years working in the field, but I've also become really interested in these sort of architectural hybrid spaces as a creative or critical expression about what the future of biotechnology could look like. And so that's probably been one of the biggest creative pushes in my career in the last 5 or 10 years. I also run a research group at the University of Windsor. It's called Incubator Art Lab. These are our students last year. So I have usually 8 to 10 employees. Some are students, some are staff every year. And this research group helps me to produce my own work and helps me produce the events through the lab and host the workshops and engage with students in public schools. Also, a number of these participants are also artists and bioartists themselves at the master's level or professionally. So they also are supported through developing their own work within the context of this lab group. This is a good example of us working in the lab on one of my projects. So you can see it's really a team effort. I work across many fields. So in these instances, you can see I'm collaborating with some of the scientists on the team. And we're working on protocols to do a piece called Baroque Biology, Paper Theater, which I will show you in today's presentation. I also teach the undergraduate Bioart, Contemporary Art, and the Life Sciences class. I've taught at a number of universities all over the world, at Concordia in Montreal, at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, and then done guest lectures everywhere. And I have to say, these like makerly, hands-on auto manufacturing town students are really, really, really wonderful when it comes to bioart, because they're not afraid of trying things by hand and learning new techniques and disassembling things that seem to maybe already exist or have some sort of authority. So I find they're a really fearless bunch and very enthusiastic. And the department has really taken on bioart as just a regular area. So you can take painting, you can take photography, and you can take bioart all within our fine arts program at the University of Windsor. Otherwise, I would like to say that over the years, I've come up with sort of an essential tenet that the lab operates under, and that is the notion that biotechnology might be a technology of love. And I mean that in creating loving relationships within the lab between humans, but also between humans and non-humans across species. And when I say love, I don't mean like romantic love. I'm not talking about rom-com love. I'm talking about durational, mutual respect and care over time. I'm talking about a commitment to one another, even when sometimes it's boring or annoying or painful. I'm talking about an acknowledgement of contributions across species and an acknowledgement of even suffering and death. And to really understand that the relationships and the work that we produce within those spaces are mutual. So my Canada Research Chair has been really focused on reimagining biotech futures through these bioart practices. And I want to move away from like Hollywood visions of, biotech futures that are run by corporations and have to be saved by young people with all sorts of athletic genius, and move towards collaborative, cohabitative, intergenerational, interrelational productions of what our biotech future could look like. And so in my research, I'm interested in integrating feminist and post-colonial perspectives, advanced digital and biotechnologies working together. I also think that we make huge mistakes when we don't turn back in determining how we go forward. And we need to integrate historical, agricultural, and indigenous knowledges into developing our biotech future. This involves community engagement, and I mean real community engagement and collaboration, which is sometimes painful or awkward, or you learn you're going in the wrong direction. This is a commitment to sustainability. And this is also a commitment to love, joy, gratitude, and the acknowledgement of suffering within the research process and within the research environment. So today I'm just going to show you a few of some of my outputs that have come from this space. This is a show that opened up just before the pandemic in January 2020, and it was a really exciting opportunity. I took my students up in a car. This is a few hours out of town at the University of Waterloo. The exhibition was called Baroque Biology. And again, interested in creating these very feminine, domestic, over the top, like the total rejection of objectivity within the scientific environment and the scientific process. And it was the last time we all really saw each other, and we all piled into cars and did a road trip. And the students and staff came up and enjoyed the opening and celebrated the opening after years of many years of work it took to produce this work. So in the center, you can see the digital prints called Baroque Biology Paper Theater. I'll give you a breakdown of those today. On the right is a new piece called Biosafety Puppet Playhouse. It is like a puppet house and a puppet theater, but it also is a functioning biological safety cabinet. So you can do sterile work within that environment, but you can do it for audiences, and you can do it within the context of this narrative of a little puppet theater. All of the organisms painted on that puppet theater are organisms that are local to the University of Windsor environment. Some are invasive species, some are otherwise. Again, just trying to think about like hyperlocavore, culturally and biologically specific research methodologies. On the left here, you can see a piece called the Great Lakes Algae Organ. And it's a street organ based on the Dutch tradition. It's a bicycle pulled organ, and it plays music when you crank it. Dun, 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 dun. But the back is a functioning algae lab, and we grow an algae colony in there. You can look at algae under the microscope. You can do shots of algae. You can talk, and then we talk a lot about algae. We talk about algae in the Great Lakes system and how it could be seen as invasive species. We talk about it as a biofuel and probably one of the greatest producers of oxygen on the planet. So it allows for these sorts of, I'm interested in producing these complex engagements with different biotech processes and organisms. So just to give you a little breakdown of how a piece like some of this research is produced, this is a Baroque Biology Paper Theater. There are 20 photographs of GMO bacteria growing in these little theatrical vignettes. And the idea is that these non-human organisms are engaged in biotechnological processes and that we are learning from them. And rather than us discovering their knowledge, they are teaching us. And sometimes we are open to listening to this information, and other times we are ignorant of it or even hostile to it. And I was thinking a lot about William Hogarth's allegorical stories that he did in his engravings, and thinking about sort of these allegories of a biotech past that may give us a different definition of a biotech future. So this is how a project like that might start, just little teeny tiny tests, a couple of years in advance. These are visual tests. There's also technical tests to see if we can make three-dimensional forms by casting agar. And then I use images like this to also garner funding in exhibitions, because sometimes it takes a couple of years to roll out a project like this. A lot of my research is medium technology. I am not a new technology producer. I'm interested in new and novel uses for existing technologies. So a lot of my projects involve hacking or reusing existing systems towards the production of art. So in this project, we use the Amino Labs, which is like a DIY at-home GMO teaching kit. And they've created a rainbow of 10 colors that you can genetically modify bacteria to become. We approached them at the beginning and said, and like they have like, it's like a Betty Crocker kit. So there's enough to make one plate of each and then there's nothing left. So we approached them and said, maybe they could sell us extra medium. And they said, no, thank you. They didn't want to allow us to continue to grow more than their kit would grow. So we reverse engineered the recipe and have created medium now that will support their bacteria. And then we spent a couple of years just really playing with like casting agar. We worked with gold leaf on agar, doesn't work. We did temporary tattoos on agar, pretty good. Put lots of sparkly things into agar. We learned how to dye agar. We started using food grade dyes. If you use food coloring, it has too much alcohol in it, your bacteria will not grow on there. And then we started making these sort of like test vignette plates. These are 26 by 26 centimeter plates, starting to create vignettes and interactions between microscopic or microbiological organisms and these other sort of larger organisms in representation. And then eventually after 2 or 3 years of this, we got to a system where we could really set the plates into motion and have them function properly. So this is the final artworks. I've ordered paper theater sets online. They're historical, beautiful, and lots of collage materials. We lay them out in the lab. We grow the dishes in advance, and then I have a photographer who comes in and we do StatCam photography of these in process. Much like a scientific paper, you can see that the authors on this work are significantly long. It really took a number of students over 3 years to generate this level of output. So now these work as digital photographs, and they are exhibited within context of other works and sometimes on their own. Again, all of them are using the sort of authority and also the whimsy maybe of fairy tales or puppet theaters as a way to create this sort of accessible dialogue, but also again, a little bit hierarchical, like the space is very royal. But the people who are experiencing the organisms experiencing this hierarchy or in the process of hierarchical roles are inverted, right? So rather than the king or queen sitting at the top, we have here an image of mitosis. So other things I've been up to lately, like all of you, I've been on Zoom a lot and I'm tired of it, but I'm really trying to also reinvent what are ways that we can create very entertaining and maybe even very embodied interspecies moments on through this technology. On the left here was a keynote lecture that I gave for the Global Community Bio Summit at MIT last year. And they asked me to do something called the gratitude offering to the organisms. And so during the height of our lockdown, I gained permission to go into my lab and we had no organisms in there. We killed them all because we knew we had to close. And so I brought in some microorganisms with me from my home. Like I brought some zooplankton I purchased online, and I brought some tomatoes I'd grown in my garden. And I gave this like soliloquy to the organisms that had passed in our lab. And the sort of like cohabitation that we're going to have to sort out with this new virus, COVID-19, moving forward. And then on the right here is just a recent performance I did. So I've been bringing my computer into the lab. I've been reusing the lab as a stage. In the second images here, I'm wearing a costume called the Gentleman Scientist, who's an alter personality of mine. And I've put the laptop into the sterile hood. And so I'm trying to like harness maybe the position of the organism in the lab and invert that relationship. The other thing that we did more recently is we did a virtual opening for our new studio space. And it was a 25-minute sort of like MTV 1990s thing where I ran around the neighborhood and introduced myself to all the neighbors while wearing funny outfits. If anyone wants to check that out, you can find it on our YouTube channel called Incubator Art Lab. And then the last thing I've been doing, and wow, I went really fast today. I usually go like better on time, but I'll wrap it up soon, is I just got back from Slovenia. And this is my first in-person exhibition since the pandemic started. And I got to tell you that there's nothing like real organisms and real bodies and real like sharing breath in a space together. To make you feel alive and to make you feel entangled and to understand the fragility and the codependency of interspecies relationships. So this is a show I just opened up at Kapelika Gallery called When Microbes Dream. And this is just some of my iPhone documentation. It's not the professional documentation yet. You know, a lot of you all know they have a black box space, so it was just so fascinating to get some of my artworks out of the white cube into this black box environment. It really hyped up the theatrical sort of underpinnings of the narratives that I use to describe my work. This piece on the top left here is called Laboratory Ecologies. And again, trying to think about all of the organisms that we share the lab with, but maybe also how that ecology is connected to our planetary ecology. I think so often we think that labs are separate, or what happens in a lab is not the same, but actually it's not separate. Metabolically, it is not separate. Waste-wise, it is not separate, but also culturally and emotionally, it is not separate. And so I'm really interested in creating these like cacophony images of biotech species engaging with other organisms that we might conceive of as wild or natural. On the right here are, you'll see the Biosafety Puppet Playhouse, and then also a new work called When Microbes Dream. And it's a wall mural that has placed on it another artwork that I made a few years ago called Algae Spiral. And it spirals this fluid back and forth through this device on the wall. And then the last thing that I did while I was there is I did some more of the Petri dish works, and I often will leave them living in spaces. So these were left in the biological safety cabinet. And just to prevent smell, I got some of those diving dry bags, so that the ones you can put your cell phone into. So this is a new experiment because I hate the smell. I've got them sealed in there, and they're going to sit there for the next month or so, and we will see how bad they stink. That is everything I have prepared for you today.
Thank you very, very much, Jennifer. That was wonderful for me. Please let me know if there are any questions. Raise your hand or just formulate them. Till then, I do have a question, and I'd really love to ask it. So I'm wondering, I was looking at the GMO bacteria and the slides you were playing with the agar, right? And I'm really curious about the kind of experimental component of these works. So, you know, the way I think of it is this. So you do have to have some sort of plan, right? I mean, you do want for the algae or the bacteria to look in a certain way, whereas the algae themselves have their own rules, which, you know, they kind of don't do what you want them to. So how do you manage this experimental component? Do you kind of play with them until they kind of look the way you want, or you just learn to manipulate them, learn to chemically manipulate them until you get some interesting
So I conceive of it as a collaboration. And I would like to also acknowledge it is not an equal collaboration. It is not a collaboration in the Western scientific sense where we have like verbal consent and contracts. But there are these sort of two or more organisms functioning, and there's some sort of result from our interaction, right? And I have some goals, and the other organisms have some goals. A lot of those goals are unspoken between us. So I often have an idea of what I would like when I start a project, but I have learned over the years that they're going to do what they're going to do, right? And so first of all, I have to be open to like the idea of like success or failure or success and accident has really had to leave my practice, right?
Right.
What I've learned to do over the years is, and what I've become better at, when I first started out, I was really trying to make things do what I wanted them to do. Now I start into a relationship and I try and figure out what they need to get out of this relationship. And I can tell that through things like, under what circumstances are they happy and healthy, right? Under what circumstances are they thriving? And then, so there's that type of game where you're building a relationship to figure out what they need. And my projects have to be built around them getting what they need and me getting what I am hoping for as a sort of balance, right? So it becomes a little bit more like having a pet or like animal husbandry, where you have to figure out how to meet their needs in a way that will also meet yours. And it doesn't always work. And sometimes it ends horribly. And it ends horribly like A, the project smells bad and it never works out. B, you drop them on the floor and you kill them and you cry for 3 weeks. Or C, it doesn't feel right and you feel like maybe you've abused another organism and you're not happy with yourself. And you say to yourself, okay, I'm not doing that again. So like there's lots of ways that it doesn't work, but there's lots of ways that it does.
So generally, it's basically figuring out the right way to have a symbiosis, right? I mean, the right way in which you can both benefit from this kind of interaction.
Yes, and I guess I just want to be clear that right means that there's also a wrong way. Like it's not that black and white, but you try and find a way that they can live and do what they need to do. You can do what you need to do, and that happens, right? And so, for example, you know, some theorists have considered that maybe even on the one hand, like think about flowers, for example, maybe they're using us and using their beauty and their smell to harness us to grow them more, or to help propagate them, or help breed them, right? Well, some people have said maybe the same could be said for laboratory organisms. We always presume that they're the suffering and they're experiencing the most loss out of this relationship.
They're the patients, right?
We could also imagine that maybe they figured out that we need them, and that maybe we're the parasite. It helps our health. You know, we've expended our lifespan by having this relationship with lab organisms, but we propagate them to a great extent. The biomass of organisms in the lab is really large now on this planet. So maybe it's working for them too. And maybe not, but you know, I'm just saying it's a gray area. I don't think there's a 100% right or wrong answer.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't help it. Just, I mean, your talk made me think, and your answers made me think that, you know, from a like more philosophical point of view, you tend to be pushing towards the conclusion that all these organisms, right, have a sort of agency, which can be kind of harvested and can be, you know, speculated in a different way than simply, you know, their material function or whatever.
And agency outside of like human consciousness necessarily, although some organisms have consciousness, right? But they do have metabolic, biological drives that perpetuate how they move through the world. And we have to acknowledge that and manage that, our relationship with that. And quite frankly, I think if we sort of acknowledge that, we could, in the longer run, that becomes a great model towards sustainability. Like how the hell are humans gonna live on this planet in a way where we don't snuff ourselves out? We're gonna have to start really listening to and collaborating with the other organisms we share this planet with.
Great. Great, so, well, thank you, Jennifer. I feel like we should be moving forward. I can just give you the mic and, you know, the floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys, do you see the screen? Yeah?
Yep.
Everybody's seeing it? So first of all, I want to thank Jennifer. I think it was an amazing talk. I'm all juiced up, you know. I have actually some questions, but maybe that's for later. Yeah, so maybe also before I really start talking, be careful because there are some videos and maybe the sound could, you know, be a little bit loud. So yeah. So yeah, welcome everybody. My name is Frederic Deville. I'm an artist working on the interstice of art, science, and technology in digital and physical spaces. And as you can read here, art is the poetics of the imagination and science is the poetics of reality. And I think that's in a nutshell a little bit what I'm doing. So conceptual crux of my artistic praxis, as Ovidio already mentioned, is you know, exploring the notions of the inaudible, the intangible, and the invisible, dark ecologies, invisible territories, as well as digital and physical spaces. And I'm also drawn to transsectoral synergies, meaning collaborations with organizations like NASA or industry or that kind of things, you know, and also transdisciplinary practices or multidisciplinary practices. And that's a quote from Einstein, that things should be simple, but not simpler. So I really love complexity, but it's always so great if you can, you know, bring it down to something which is elegant and which actually, you know, hides some kind of complexity and makes it actually, you know, everything a little bit more mysterious. Like that. Final quote. I really love quotes. I'm sorry, but this is from Bertolt Brecht. And art is not only a mirror to reflect society, but it's also a hammer to shape it. And I truly believe that. And that's really unlocking the potential of art. You know, if you can change society, and you start, of course, with individuals or, you know, other agencies. And just to give you an idea, because some people probably don't know that, my artistic practice can be individual, of course, collaborative, and there's a lot of R&D often with the stuff that I develop. And I do think that research is ultra important because, you know, producing art it's easy, but taking the time to really thoroughly think about what you're doing, that just takes time. And I don't think that you produce then so much art, to be honest. But aside that, I do commissions. I apply sometimes for grant applications. I sell some art. I do some freelance jobs, you know, if people hire me for something, and consultancy, which is actually paying sometimes quite well. I did a cover on sustainability ideation, MER Group, that's, you know, also ideation and innovation consultancy. Vito, that was remote sensing, you know, specifically hyperspectral imaging, a project that I recently done also with the Space Agency here in Belgium and a startup. I was also a guest professor at, you know, art science interfaculty, transmedia, King's College, and so on. Currently, I just finished a new paper for an encyclopedia of media arts for Bloomsbury, and I've been writing also some film scripts. So now we're going to start with the video, so the sound can be a little bit loud maybe, so please bring your levels a little bit down. Just 2 pieces, just to give you an idea. A little bit older works, but I like to go into them into detail a little bit later on. Hey, voila. So these pieces are almost like 8, or maybe the other one, the Swarm Robotics, 10 years old. So it's quite, it's not a recent work, let's say it like that. But let's tune in, let's say the first one, which is called Let Angel. So it's a kinetic audiovisual piece. And I consider it as a kind of realization of the Anthropocene, or at least it could be perceived as such. So maybe for some people who are not acquainted with the term Anthropocene, it's a kind of geological epoch, let's say it like that. I think the common consensus right now is a little bit that it started in 1945. So the Trinity project, so meaning the first nuclear explosion.
Sorry, Frederik. Can I interrupt? So I think I didn't hear any sound on the video you just played, and I think Nicole didn't as well. So
I heard
it.
it.
Okay.
I heard it. I'm sorry
So
for
how
that.
important? Should you play it one more time? Is it important or?
No, I think if you see the visual, I think you have an idea, because otherwise I'm going to get lost in technical solutions and finding out what's happening. But
Okay.
anyway, I heard it, so I'm not sure why it hasn't reached you guys, but I can send you a link and you can watch it later
definitely.
on
Maybe
if you want. So that
put it
will
in the chat.
compensate a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Great.
So yeah, talking again about this Anthropocene. Yeah, Trinity glass also, by the way, is a kind of uranium glass. So there's radioactive glass found at the site in New Mexico. And the Anthropocene is actually the point where humans become a driver for just as the, as the natural forces and even as strong. So it shapes actually the environment around us. So I find it really interesting. Of course, because it questions our position as human beings in the world, and just as Jennifer also questions, about agency and our interrelationship with living things, but also non-living things. So I found it quite interesting. So inside the, it was very difficult actually to find uranium glass, or let's say in this case produce it. Uranium glass is these rods that you see, and they're fluorescent. It's a very particular glass, actually. You almost don't find it anymore. It's like antique. But it was actually, I think, discovered actually that these potentials also by the Romans. But in 1789, I think there was a German scientist, forgot his name, but this guy actually saw the potential of this stuff and the fluorescence and so on, and explored that. So it became extremely popular as a material in the 19th century. And then I think in the 20th century, during the Great Depression, so the 1930s, it was also quite popular. It was then called Vaseline glass because it resembled some petroleum Vaseline that people could buy in stores, and it's the same kind of green, yellowish color. So it's called, Vaseline glass or Great Depression glass. And in fact, you have uranium salt in there. So in these glass rods, in the past, in the 19th century, it was 25%. Although glass is a great insulator, nevertheless, 25% is quite big. But in this case, it's just 2%. So now in the 1930s, it was already kind of 2%. But nevertheless, if you hold or you have an enough sensitive Geiger-Müller counter, you can actually measure the radioactivity. So what happens actually there? Just a little bit of science. So actually these uranium salts, actually they absorb certain kind of wavelengths of light, and then actually they emit a particular wavelength of light back. So that gives this really fluorescent and unique radioactive glow. And I think what's great is that people discover, what is radioactivity, what is particle decay. So it has this kind of educational, value. And also that particles can die, everything can die, particles as well. And that actually, everything particles, but also the universe, going from micro to macro, from subatomic to micro, is relational. I'm referring here to Karen Barat, an incredible philosopher as well. But the nice thing is that people can explore it themselves. They get confronted with, sometimes ignorance about what is radioactivity, is it harmful? And some people were frightened in the exhibition, other people not. And I think the nice thing is that it's interactive. So people can select samples of natural uranium ore, and with different strengths like millisievert, and they can put it into the sensor, let's say it like that, which is a hacked Geiger tube, and it measures the radioactive decay. It uses that to trigger a whole choreography of sound and light. So we use it actually as a random number generator, and that that's actually a little bit a piece. The other piece, Umwelt Virutopia, is about swarm robotics. And swarming behavior is something that we see in nature and in culture. Think about the Kaaba and and the Muslims swirling around this kind of mastaba, this black cube. But we see the nature, a school of fish, a swarm of, or a flock of birds, let's say it like that. And so we tried with the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, bring that down to robotics. We try to emulate that behavior with micro and collective swarm robotics, where all these robotics try to collaborate together. And if one fails, the others will still continue their job. And that's, of course, very interesting. It makes it actually very robust as a kind of system. But the cool thing was that it's not the robotics itself. It's not even the technology itself. It's actually the fact that people were at a certain point in the installation sitting around it, observing, and they became part of this kind of ecology. It's almost like they were sitting around a petri dish and seeing these organisms move, and they start to play with that. They were sometimes picking one up, putting it back, or if one was jammed, and so you get this kind of interrelationship between non-living things and living things. So that I found really interesting. It was also sound reactive. So if you whistle, or certain frequencies of sound, so that was with fast Fourier transformation, we could pick that up, and we could actually trigger lasers which are mounted on top of each individual unit. That created actually a kind of architecture of light in space. So that was quite beautiful, to be honest. Just another project I wanna present you. I took it randomly, but it was a collaboration with Professor Gieris, which I know quite well, because I'm also a member of the Royal Academy of Arts and Science here in Belgium. And she's really cool. She works also with NASA, I think, sometimes, but she's really far out in her field. And actually, she asked me to do something with CT scans. And I said, yeah, I never worked with CT scans, but let's do something. And it's basically X-ray, and you take slices, samples of something. In this case, it actually was a mouse or a rat or something like that. So we made some custom software here in my studio to actually visualize that. But even more to visualize all the different layers of the building up, and it becomes quite abstract. You will see it now, if all goes well. So now we travel actually through all the layers of such a CT scan. It's quite beautiful. Takes some time, but so let's say it's an orthogonal projection from the top. And it goes on and on until you have the rat, let's say it like that. So I will move forward. It's quite hypnotic, I think. So that was the next step, where I actually applied some randomization so on the voxels, basically. Voxel is a three-dimensional pixel, and actually try to glitch actually these CT layers that are voxelized to create some glitch aesthetic in this work. Okay, so now I want to go deeper on one particular project, which is actually the Black is Black, something I've collaborated with Rice University, later on NASA. And now I'm working on something new. Cannot say anything, but let's start here. The Black is Black is something that I always found fascinating. But where does this idea come from? this idea comes from one of my favorite artists, which is Yves Klein. And Yves Klein was an artist 1964, something like that. He actually collaborated also with a chemist to develop a synthetic resin, which was called rhodopas. It's a polyvinyl acetate, and actually it was a kind of glue that helped to preserve the luminosity of the pigment. So I think that's one of the very nice examples of art-science collaboration. And then, of course, the other one is Malevich, of course, the black square. I think it's evident. I'm not going to go into that too much. I think you all know the story of Malevich, maybe better than me, but it's absolutely a wonderful piece. There are some people that, of course, sparked my curiosity, because I did also some philosophy, of course. And of course, you have Foucault and Agamben, and they really talk about the relationship between, the idea of darkness and perception and so on, but also the zeitgeist, the time we're living in. And I think it's something really universal when you try to explore such projects from, an artistic, philosophical point of view, but also a scientific point of view, and you really try to develop it. But I will come to that, going from concept to realization. So again, this started also a long time ago, thinking about this project when I was still a student doing painting. And I stopped painting at a certain point because I knew there was no, room anymore for innovation. But I was wrong. Because I discovered nanotechnology, of course. Nanotechnology is something really incredible. For instance, here you see a scanning electron microscope of a human hair. So it's 20 to 200 microns, which is 20,000 nanometer, and 1 nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter. Let's say it like that. But at this scale, everything changes. You can make materials with unique properties and so on and so on. And one of the cool examples is, of course, the Lycurgoscope. Is a 4th century after Christ. And actually, if you put a light behind it, it becomes red. And if you put a light in front of it, it becomes green. This is really great because it's, I think one of the first examples of diachronic glass, I think, where you have this effect of plasmonic resonance. So plasmonic resonance is a kind of choreography between, electrons and photons, and they push, actually, the photons push the electrons out of their, let's say, orbit, but it's not really an orbit, of course. Of course, due to that, you create different kind of oscillations, and it emits a different frequency. But it's a beautiful piece. And of course, they weren't really aware what they were doing, but in any case, they did it. But there were even older examples, like the Mayans. And the Mayans, they made this beautiful pottery, and the Mayan blue is very famous, and it still stays extremely, it conserves extremely well. And that's because due of nanoparticles in the glazing. And of course, you have the stained glass in the churches, you get this ruby red color, and that's because you have a colloid, a colloid actually of gold and silver particles. So really, in a nutshell, the geometry of the nano object is really important. So we're not talking about molecular agents, which are pigments. We're talking here about structural color. So the geometry of it is super important, and the size and the layering. And as you can see, the smaller you go, the more blue it gets. It's almost like a guitar where the strings are really, really tight. It's a high pitch, and otherwise it's going to the red, which is more the lower one. That's a very simple analogy, but maybe it gives some idea what we're talking about. But nanotechnology was kicked off, let's say it like that, in 1959, actually, with our friend Richard Feynman. And he said, there is plenty of room at the bottom. That was his seminal talk. And he said, this is going to open a new field, new exploration, and it will change society. Another one, which is Richard Smalley. I will go into that just a little bit later, but he's one of the Nobel Prize winners together with Robert Girl and Harold Krodo. because they invented actually, they synthesized the C60 molecule, which is the buckyball. And these guys imagined that, you know, they could construct actually molecular machines from that scale upwards. But these buckyballs are actually amazing because they are found actually in the interstellar medium. I mean, in the 70s, 1975, they were theorized. How do you say that? The theory was there that they should be there, and the hypothesis that they could be found in space in the interstellar medium, which is a kind of, let's say, field of radiation and matter between stars and galaxies. And actually they found later on, I think 10 years ago, not even that it truly exists. They exist actually in space, and they are found near stars that go supernova. So what's important about these is that they look like a football. It's almost like a soccer ball, and they function as a cage. So the conductance is incredible. So basically, when there would be something organic or some molecule even inside, it could travel actually safely through space. And actually, some people think that this is the basis for life on Earth, you know, maybe. Anyway, so in 1985, the buckyball was synthesized at Rice University in the Small Institute. Later on, by Professor Ijima, it was extruded into a carbon nanotube, and now you have single-walled, multi-walled, and so on. And funnily enough, in 2004, it was graphene was found, which is just one layer of this carbon stuff. So you can imagine these nanotubes as chicken wire. I think it has the same kind of look and feel. It's extremely electric conductive. I think it's 10 times more than copper. The heat conductivity is great, mechanical properties, tensile strength, and so on and so on. So it's incredibly, I mean, the opening, the diameter is just a few nanometers across. And it means if you can make that into a tunable property, you can actually control photons, single photons, meaning you can control light. And then it can become a sensor in medicine, or, you know, it can become a lot of stuff. So I found that really interesting. And I said, like, hey, maybe this could be the stuff to produce something blacker than black. You know, and so I went to Rice University in 2010. I was the first artist in residency there. In 2008, actually, I started already with, you know, communicating with the professor about this project, and we start to kick off. So on the left-hand side, on the top, you see an ion sputtering machine. So basically, we take some super concentrated material, in this case, 99.9999% pure iron, and we deposit atoms on a silicon wafer, meaning your canvas, your substrate, it's going to put on it. Then we're going to put it into a chemical vapor deposition room, which is the image below. It's a kind of, you know, if you go to a bakery and you put your bread in an oven, it's like an oven, you know, but there is some kind of gas flowing through that, which is ethylene, and it has a feedstock of carbon molecules. And because of heat and these carbon molecules and the particles you have deposited actually on your substrate, this black as black, these nanotubes are starting to grow. So here, when we look at the scanning electron microscope images, we see from bigger resolution to small resolution, we actually see that on the bottom left, that these carbon nanotubes are not straight at all. They look like spaghetti. And so in order to produce something which is blacker than black, you need to control single photons, but you have to trap them. You have to be creative. You have to say, like, hey, let's use a cavity principle. So if this photon, let's say, comes down and it falls on top of the surface, it cannot go in the opening, you know, of such a tube because it's too small. These ping pong balls, these photons, will fall in between these vertical nanotubes. And once they're there, it's like they fall into a labyrinth in a sponge or something, and they get lost, and they go all directions, and they get lost. And the chance that they will resurface is almost zero. So combination of very pure material, controlling geometry of these nano objects, creating a trap for light, visible light, but also infrared and far infrared, makes it actually super black. And then the last thing, if you see the image on top, second image on the top, you see on these cubes a little bit of hair. And this hair are nanowires. And these nanowires actually diffuse the light in all directions. So meaning that if you have a black surface, blacker than black surface, and you look here or here or here, it will look the same. It will stay as black. So this is another, trick that we apply. And there are some others. So here you see actually such a carbon nanotube growing, because you have bottom growth, you have tip growth, you have many types of growth. Yeah, it's actually quite fascinating to see something like that being constructed, because that is biology almost applied to engineering. It's a self-organizing principle. You have to create the right conditions and it will start to grow by itself, which I think is very interesting. So here you see one of the pieces, which is a blacker than black square. This is one done with NASA. There we had some other challenges, which were really cool. Like the next one, I will show it here. So the next, what I tried to do also with NASA was, can we actually grow it on a three-dimensional structure? That is very complicated stuff. But also as an artist, I was thinking like, what could be an interesting shape to grow this blackest black on? And in Belgium has a long history in coal and coal mines, so extractivism. And I got my hands on the shafts and the whole network under Belgium of the coal mines. So this is Belgium underground. And then I thought, like, yeah, okay, let's put this into custom software, see how all these data points look like. And let's see how, when we bend all these and we simplify all these networks and we make, let's say, 7 layers of that, because we had 7 coal mines here in Belgium, how would that look like? And it looks like this. So it's a kind of data visualization in a sculpture with some of this blackest black on, but a specific one, it's a combination with a polymer and this stuff, which makes it a little bit more shiny and a little bit less black. So of course, there's a whole history of this black stuff going far, far away. But I guess one of the most contemporary artists, post-war artists, is probably Anish Kapoor. And funnily enough, but I knew that this was coming, he tried to produce also something similar, but years and years later. In fact, I actually found pictures of Kapoor posing against my work. I'm not sure if it's photoshopped, but it is. To conclude that project a little bit, because my time is shortening, I think there is a strong connection conceptually, with the history of mankind, and the history of carbon, and let's say the prehistoric drawings on the wall with charcoal, to space, space where we observed actually these buckyballs, space, the space elevator concept from the 70s, I think. But that could be only built, well, there are 2 other materials, but could only built with carbon nanotubes, and would democratize space, by the way, space travel. Here you see another one using also photonic winds to push the space elevator into space, but also to replace the copper grids, and that's more a practical application, the copper grids of the Earth with carbon nanotubes. So we wouldn't have any loss of energy anymore. It would travel freely. And that was actually the dream of Smalley when he was producing that. And last but not least, I think the blackest black for me still gives rise to speculation and speculative narratives. This was in a book with, I think it's Metamorph Biennial. Yeah, about spaceships that actually use carbon technology and so on and so on. Anyway, So that's a little bit it. That's my wrap up. I want to conclude with just one last quote. We are all tiny signals in a vast emptiness. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Frederik. I mean, a lot to think about and to talk about, right? I see a raised hand. So, Mihaela, would you like to go first?
No,
I think that's the applause
I
button.
already
Okay,
clapped
yeah.
my hands.
Yeah.
Congrats for this presentation. Great.
If we do have no question yet, I would just ask you maybe to keep the schedule and not. I wouldn't want to rush anyone into their talk. So I was thinking about maybe going up to 8:30 Romanian time. So this will vary according to your. So if this is okay, we maybe can have like 5 minutes or 10 minutes at the end for, you know, more general questions for each presentation and so on. But I really wanted to ask like one small thing about Frederik, one of your projects. So this is about the robotics choreography. I didn't catch the sound in that video, but I was just imagining, you know, did you think about going to a more large scale? So I was really thinking about how would the, you know, robots dancing fit into like an outdoor kind of way, into like an architectural kind of designed way. So did you think about going like large scale, going, you know, integrating some sort of architecture into it and doing something like this?
Yeah, sure, but not with these robots. They're too fragile in a way, and actually everything what's electric and so on, it attracts dust, and you know, when this dust gets in these wheels, and it's actually quite complicated installation to set up, but also for the maintenance. But I do think, you know, if you have, you know, robust industrial, you know, tools and technologies, you probably could for sure. And I think it would be great, but yeah, it just probably would, my budget explode. I mean, so I think you could multiplicate this project by 10 or something to produce something like that.
Great. Well, thank you. I think it's time to move on to Sabina. So our next speaker is going to be Sabina Suru. Sabina, you have the floor.
Thank you. Okay, let me just share my screen. I know I was supposed to talk to you about what I do and art and stuff, but I am actually going to talk to you today about 3 accidents. And I will start with the first one, which is basically my childhood. When I was small, I was poor. So that meant I wanted to do many things and had means to do very few of them, barely any. So I relied a lot on my imagination, and I imagined things that I couldn't do and simply did them in my mind. And I fueled this with reading a lot, basically anything I could get my hands on. So art books, books on painting, technique, perspective, but most importantly on art history, because, well, it's interesting. And with all that reading, I still wanted to be an artist. Reading wasn't enough. So I went for one of my biggest soft spots, which was photography. And we are talking here early 2000s, so digital was in full swing, which made anything analog barely cost anything. So basically I went for analog instead of digital. And before I knew it, I actually fell in love with it. So I work with analog photography to this day. But then, just like I showed you in the picture before, I had a camera now, and that solved the first problem, but it didn't solve the global problem. Films processing, printing was still costly. So I decided to go for black and white instead of color for basically cost reasons. And in this context, I continued to read about color photography while I was doing black and white photography. So I read about all these color and alternative processes. I dug through history and all the technologies and all the various processes that existed at the time. And of course, I kind of stumbled upon a lot of very interesting things. And some of them are things that kind of history forgets in a way. One such case is Lippmann. This guy was a scientist. And in late 19th century, he kind of entered the quest for color photography. And he did so by applying his knowledge. So he didn't went for dyeing or using pigments. He decided to use a physical phenomenon, which is the interference of light. So he created this sort of process where he used a mercury mirror to basically record on a black and white plate the interference pattern of light that traveled through the camera. And in this way, he recorded on a black and white plate, both a black and white photograph and a color photograph at the same time. Now, he won the Nobel Prize for this in early 20th century, I think 1907, but still, he was forgotten as a contributor to color photography, and I guess the prize for it went to the Lumiere brothers for the autochrome process. But he still had a very important role in something that happened about 50 years later, also by accident, which is holography. Now, usually people associate holography with what we have seen in Star Trek and Star Wars, which is basically either a sort of 3D projection or like what we have seen in theater, Pepper's Ghost and stuff like that. But what holography actually is a technology that records three-dimensional information onto a two-dimensional surface. And it does this using the same technique that Lippmann used, which is record the pattern, the interference pattern of light that reflects from an object. And this is, well, a laser-based media that uses silver-based media at the same time. So it's something between laser technology and old school photography. But I'm going all over the place. Let me tell you about the second accident. Now, this happened when I failed at becoming a student. So I packed a bag and I jumped in a bus and I went to Portugal, where I basically found arts everywhere. In the subway station, in the roundabout, at the corner of the street, there was art everywhere. And it kind of made me realize that art doesn't necessarily materialize in a single medium. Now, this happened when I was 19 or 18, and I basically just finished a high school where painting was the main thing. And it opened my mind to question the limits of the medium, any medium, and the richness of contemporary art. So I started going to anything I could, theater, exhibitions, cinema, dance. And this is how I fell in love with contemporary dance, or at least how it started to fall in love with it, because the actual falling in love happened back in Bucharest when I managed to become a student. And I saw a theater piece, a theater-ish piece by Wim van der Keybus called Monkey Sandwich, which was a piece that happened in the theater, but it involved dancing, no dialogue whatsoever. It involved video. It involved this huge glass piece in the middle where the performer was basically submerged in water, and you kind of didn't know what was real. You had a live person in front of you on the stage, but reality seemed to be happening in the video above the stage. and what was happening on the actual stage seemed to be something like a layered story of imagination that kind of doubled the reality in a way. So I kind of wanted to add this performative component to my work, but I'm shy by nature. So the best way to do that was to collaborate with people. And basically, I just had to start meeting dancers and people that worked in this field. It took a few years, but I managed it. And this brings me, well, it doesn't bring me to my third accident. I'm just going to tell you about the third accident, which is basically, I'm a geek. It's not a time-based accident. It's a lifetime accident. So remember, I was bragging at the beginning about being a good kid and reading a lot. I kind of also grew surrounded by my brother's quests for learning electronics and computers. So I kind of grew with arts and books and electronics and computers and a lot of things that kind of formed this third accident, this contextual third accident that made me fall in love with a lot of stuff that was outside my art practice, like science. Now, you probably don't know this, but I have a soft spot for abstraction and geometry. So quantum physics was like a perfect fit in interests. And trying to understand this very delicate and yet very clear world of quantum physics led me right back to the definitions of holography. I mean, when you try to understand the most elemental level of quantum physics, you find articles about the twin split experiments. When you try to understand the interference pattern and everything that kind of makes what holography is about, you go back to the same experiments. So it actually kind of made sense to start working with scientists as well and be able to ask them all the things that I don't understand and kind of merge their practice with mine. So I went on to propose a holography project to María who is a scientist at the National Institute for Laser, Plasma and Radiation Physics. And the first thing he told me was quite a surprise to me. He told me that from his point of view, holography was an obsolete technology and had very little potential to innovate. Now, make no mistake, we were talking about analog holography, so silver-based holography, not digital media or other kind of 3D projection. But nevertheless, eventually kind of enthusiasm kind of kicked in and he went on board and he brought another scientist who is specialized in quantum physics. And basically, what I've been talking about over the last 10 or so minutes, these 3 accidents, how I stumbled upon holography, how I fell in love with contemporary art, and how I'm a geek, very long-lasting accident. But looking back at them, it seems to me more like they were dots I had to connect rather than pure accidents. And this kind of brings me to what I actually want to talk to you today, which is this project. Now, this is a project that brings together all the things I love and I've never actually had the occasion to do in a single project, which is analog photography, quantum physics, optics, video and interactive installation, and contemporary art and music. All these kind of function as very important components in what I do and what I want to do. And this is a project that reunites practitioners from all these fields into one collective work, which is more like a cognitive and sensory experiments where we kind of transposed ideas from quantum physics into the macro world. So the team that worked on this project, like I said, came from a little bit everywhere. We started from research carried out with Dr. María who is the head at the Center for Advanced Laser Technology within the National Institute for Laser, Plasma and Radiation Physics, the one I told you about before. and Dr. Vlad Toma, who is a research institute at the same, a research assistant at the same institute. And the performative installation is inspired by scientific concepts like superposition, entanglement, the uncertainty principle, Hilbert spaces. For the actual performative component, we decided to focus on superposition. The choreography was developed and performed by Bucharest-based artist Irina Marinescu, and with music composed by Alexandros Raptis. I wrote them all there for, in case you want to inquire on either of them. But now, before I tell you more, let me just give you a quick taste from one of the performances we had at the National Center for Dance here in Bucharest. Let's see now. This was a work in process performance, so it only had a couple of modular holograms and the actual performance. Okay. So, can you still hear me okay?
Yes, all is well.
Okay. Can you see the screen with the photograph, everything?
Yep. Now it's okay.
Okay. So it was interesting to see the people's reaction to holography. First of all, because there is this misconception I was telling you about. It is associated with a lot of media that are not connected with what it actually means. And once you engage with the public and you tell them about what it means and what its potential is, the reaction is always incredible. Also, since it's an experiential medium, you have to be there to see it. It's impossible to document. Trying to photograph it, it's just horrible. And it has this capacity to kind of translate a volume and the space into something like a window. And it kind of makes you question what you see, what is 3D, is it actually there? I mean, if you put a light behind a hologram, you simply get an empty plate. You have to shed a light on the hologram from an exact angle to optically reconstruct the image. In this image, I basically put an image of the same holographic module from 3 angles. So you can kind of see the difference. It looks like a 2-dimensional medium, but it's something very different. And recently we traveled with the installation at a festival in Timișoara, Simultan. It's a festival that has a focus on art and science and experimental music. And for this edition, it happened in an old tramway depot, and we just kind of had to work with the space, and we turned it into this kind of site-specific installation. And we kind of implemented something that is, in a way, essential in my work. We broke down the process into its anatomical parts, and we spread them around throughout the installation in a way to kind of explain to the public what the components are of this recording process, but also there is a beauty to each component. And in a way. The performance was part of the installation. They are not exactly separate elements, and it was held in the dark because, well, holography has this condition. But it also was something that we could use to play with the perception. We could kind of take over the exhibition space. Irina could pop here and there among the people. And in a way, this made her body kind of function like a particle that was forced to collapse in a state or another. We also made this taking over the space through video material in the festival that kind of played with our perception of position or speed or momentum or proportion in a way like observable from quantum physics. And now we are kind of going into the final stage of the project. So we are trying to extrapolate different ways of implementing ideas from quantum physics into a performative approach. And also, and this is my soft spot here, try to kind of bring holography into a more DIY place where we can, where I could basically do more with it. So switch from using just silver into using potassium dichromate or potassium ferricyanide, which is used usually in cyanotypes and is UV sensitive. But since you have UV lasers, it could make for a very interesting experiments. So, well, this was me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sabina. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand. At this point, if I may, I would like to ask something, Sabina. So mainly two things. So one is, I mean, it's the first time I really noticed that for you, so the whole art and science business seemed to be really, really personal, right? So you seem to be really telling a personal story. And I was just wanted to ask you, how do you see the prospects of art and science being a very personal type of business? That's one thing. And the second thing is just the technical stuff. So did you try, or do you consider trying like digital holography, or is it not that personal? I mean, and because of this, it's not that interesting for you?
Well, I don't think trying digital media kind of makes it less personal. I mean, the whole thing with analog and the whole tangibility of the process, it doesn't necessarily make it more personal than the digital media. It makes it more tangible. It makes it closer to what I grew up with, which was drawing, painting, being able to touch the media I work with. But digital holography, in a way similar to photography, as strange as the comparison may be, still ends on a tangible support. The thing is, the result is actually quite similar. So I'm actually curious, to be honest. I am curious to try, but it would probably just be an experiment, and I would go back to the whole process-based thing that is kind of close to my heart.
Okay, thank you. So next, it's Clive Cazot, who is actually going to be a speaker in our last session on Thursday. So Clive, go ahead.
Thank you, Vidyu. Hi, Sabina. I've actually got a question for Sabina, or it's a question that I think finds similarity in both Sabina's work and Frederic's work. So perhaps it's a question that can be for both, but both of you seem to be making work that addresses what is beyond the senses. So with Sabina, the subatomic, and Frederik, the inaudible, intangible, nothingness. But to make your to make your work, at some point, you're going to have to introduce something sensory. And I wonder what happens at that point where the thing you're interested in, that which is beyond the senses, has to take on a new, possibly alien property, something tangible. How do you, is that a question that is, no, how interesting or how difficult a question is that for your practice? Practices.
Well, the thing is, basically, holography is actually a very sensorial medium. It's the kind of art. If you make art holography, it's the kind of art piece that you cannot experience otherwise. You are in contact with it, and it's strange as a presence, because if you see it from a particular point, it's just an empty surface. If you change your point of view, it becomes this the house of this beautiful three-dimensional thing. For example, at the representation we had at the dance center, we used theater lights because they had it above, and we could light the hologram modules with 2 lights, which basically doubled, because the optical images reconstructed in such a way that each hologram became a double hologram for the viewers. And when they moved, the content of the hologram moved in very strange ways. But to answer your question, it's I actually want in my next year plan, I want to try something that is called a multiplex hologram, which is something that brings cinema and holography together, and it creates an object which moves at the same time. It moves if the viewer moves, otherwise it's just a standstill object. But when you as a viewer move around it, it becomes this dynamic thing.
All right, so maybe I misunderstood. I thought the holograms were in some sense addressing or a response to subatomic behavior, but was that a misunderstanding on my part?
In this project, yes. No, in this project, this was the point. They were an illustration of sorts. Right.
Okay. I'm just intrigued by this kind of how you connect the subatomic with the performative. But
Frederik, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a very interesting question, because for me, it's a question about the difference between projection and immersion. You know, if you have, let's say, a small painting or whatever it is, so something that is smaller than the human scale, you tend to project yourself in it. Once you get bigger, you tend to immerse yourself in it, or not, maybe tend is maybe not the word there, but it can give more a sense of immersion. Let's say it like that. But in the end, I think nothing beats imagination. And I think to make the connection back with the other speaker is, for me, I always imagined Black is Black always as, you know, something which is almost like a portal, you know, from a conceptual point of view and many other points of view, but also having maybe a whiter than white on the other side. So it's these are kind of quantum entangled in a way, because if you absorb all light, where does this light go to? You know, of course, you know, the laws of thermodynamics and so on, it gets converted into heat and so on, but it's light, it's energy. So it's there, stuck somewhere. It's condensed. It is, it's collected, and it's there. So I find that, yeah, that's really interesting. Of course, how to make people more part of it. Then you have to, let's say, you know, paint a room in this material. The only point is, you know, if you make it that high level material, it's lab material. You know, you cannot, you know, it's not just as easy as make a paint, because a paint is an emulsion and it will always decrease, you know, the absorption of light. So it would always, let's say, make it less black, you know, in simple terms. Mm-hmm. So So yeah, there is always this give and take, and between, you know, the economy of let's say, not the economy of the imagination, but how to stimulate the imagination and how to use that in your advantage to overcome certain kind of, let's say, obstacles, like not having the money to produce that, not having, and so on, from technical to, so yeah, that's, I don't know if that's already an answer to your question, Clive.
Yes, partly, I suppose. So you're saying that at one level, the blackest black is, as you say, is an object or a concept that can only exist in the laboratory. So to make it into an installation, yes, you have to use some imagination, and changes have to happen. And I suppose I find very interesting what happens in those changes, and how that is that a point where the art science dialogue does the artist have the right to appeal to the imagination at this point, but the scientist doesn't?
I don't think it has anything to do with whether you're a scientist or a non-scientist or an artist and so on. I think, you know, any scientist for sure, and also any artist, you know, that's really committed to what he or she, whatever is doing, it's about liberating, let's say, the mind. It's about liberation. It's creating new space for new ways of seeing at things, new ways of, you know, producing things, new methodologies, and so on, that resonate with, you know, your time in a way. And that I find, you know, really interesting. Of course, you know, I went as an artist in the lab with an open mind. I left the artist in the beginning behind, you know, almost like and it's only when I was in the process, you know, I started to throw off my skin almost like a snake, you know, and becoming back the artist. But in the beginning, I had to open myself, you know, because I truly think that you have to collaborate, you know, if it's in an art science collaboration, as just people who are obsessed with something, passionate about something, curious about something, and willing to destroy some things as well, you know. And that is the right ground, I think, the right fertile ground for a profound collaboration. Because, you know, if you don't open your mind and you look too much in this way, and I think it's totally bullshit, you know, that all artists are like, you know, minds open. I don't believe that. They're also people, and they also have their flaws. But I think, you know, I would almost say it like in the terms of Peter Brook, theater guy. He wrote a book about the empty space, and it tells a story about, you know, he defines theater in 4 ways. You have the theater of Artaud, which is this animalistic, almost like brute kind of theater. But in the end, he talks about creating empty space first. And I think that's important. It's nothing per se to do with Buddhism or religion. It's just about trying to open yourself, get rid of all the things you bought into, and step into that with that kind of, you know, feeling and sensibility. Because I think it's rather a sensibility into a kind of collaborative kind of field. And then, of course, then you have the other points. You know, stop me if I have to shut up. But I do think there is a difference between, let's say, producing such a material, because it's not an object yet. You know, it's not an artwork yet. But producing something, the seeds of something, and producing a material that allows you, which is a concept, but which allows it to transcend once it becomes an artwork, and it not only becomes an artwork, but there's also an artist behind. So now you get in this Heideggerian dialectic, but it's the artist also and his or her vision that actually supports the artwork and creates a context for that. And then it gets meaning. Then you get in this kind of process of semantics and so on and so on. Well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. I feel like we should be moving forward. So anyway, thank you, Sabina, thank you, Clive, and thank you, Frederik, for the discussion. And now let us move to Nicole Spitt, who is gonna present some of her work and her practice. So Nicole, you have the floor. I think everything is all right.
Okay, I will share screen then. Again.
I can see it well. So.
Yes, okay. And everybody can hear me, I guess. Let's see.
I can.
You can or can't?
It's okay. It's okay. I can.
Okay. Okay, I've got a little spot here. My name is Nicole Spitt. I'm from Studio Daarheen. And Daarheen means that way in my language. I'm Dutch. And I like to look at the future. So I look at what is happening now in art, in science, and I extrapolate it to the future. And then I use my imagination to create things that could help start to in the process of making. So this is a little bit of my work, and I see myself as a speculative designer. My former practice was an industrial designer, just making tires of bicycles or remote controls or furniture. But now I'm more a speculative designer, and I'm also a member of Speculative Futures Amsterdam. And we try to look at this is the present, and the future, of course, diverges, and there are possible futures, plausible futures where I'm looking for, and probable futures, and of course the preferable futures. And between the plausible futures, it should not be this topic, but it should be sort of ideal. What do we want? And we talk about that also at Speculative Futures Amsterdam. And speculative design is a little bit over here in the spectrum, so it's not really real only art, and it's not only visionary or strategy thinking or design thinking. It's on the it's between, and it uses both sides, and it has sides of critical design in it. So to think about things, what could happen, what could go wrong. And it's also about responsibility of designers. So that's a little bit what speculative design is. And as a speculative designer, I'm very interested in biotechnology and bioart. And I started it in 2015, but in 2018, I had a neo-bio project exhibited at the Dutch Design Week. And I will show you a few of those projects. And I was interested in biotech. I started looking at scientific articles, and I came across the GCV1 Syn 3.0, which is a sort of empty cell. It has just 473 genes in it, and it's only to keep the cell alive. And sort of a minimal cell. And I was thinking, when you have a minimal cell, could you not start building things with that cell, just like with Lego? And it's also the CRISPR-Cas technology of cutting genes and putting them again together. And then I started thinking as an artist more, can we build new animals or new products or new things with living cells? It's a little bit playing as a god, but we do that all the time, also with virus vaccinations or that kind of things. So I was thinking, can we do something with it? And there's also, we could create synthetic DNA or DNA which is only 4 base pairs, but we could also create more and create other strange things. And I was also not working really, but investigating at the wet lab of the Waag Society. And Waag Society will also come along in a next talk of Lucas Evers from also from the Netherlands. And I was over there, and I came to the wet lab often to research, and there I get in contact with microbiologists and get my information over there and could make some experiments. This is, for instance, I wanted to make it visible if we can combine plants with humans, which is of course not really possible because we have a totally different cell structure. But there is a little sea slug which puts the little how do you say it? I've lost the word. Well, the green photosynthesis corals. How do we call it? I don't know. In its own skin.
Like chlorophyll? Or?
Yes, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, in its own skin, and then it can live for quite a long time with only the bladgroen corals. I have to look it up. With the green chlorophyll things like this in its skin. So that's what's one of the experiments which I started to do at the wet lab over there. And I was very interested if I saw big tech companies like Amazon and Google, Alphabet, starting to put an enormous amount of money in biotech. And I was wondering, what will they do with it? And what kind of products would they make? And that's the start of my really strange project, NeoBio. So can you imagine in your head what those products would look like? And maybe you can imagine right now for just a few seconds, what kind of products, if we combine biotechnology and living cells and synthetic biology into normal products, and would it be normal products? Well, the first one I came up with was we can combine electronic circuits with living cells. And as I said, and as an industrial designer, I also designed remote controls. And I was thinking, what would they look like if we combine them with living cells? And we can also program living cells with code, just by using computer code and a program called Cello from Verilog. And we can program cells so that we can, make them communicate also with electronics. And there's also, we have the electronic circuits which have sort of language, communicate to each other, and also with living cells. So this could be one product. It has some geles at the back, and it needs, you can put it in a bowl of proteins, so it gets fed, just like you would put your mobile phone into into the electricity at night. Then you can put this in a bowl of nutrition gel. And they're a little bit caricatural products, so it's a little bit over the top, but it was meant on the exhibition to make people think. Some things are already possible, and how do we, when we see them, what kind of reaction does it provoke? And maybe they could be happening. And at the time now, in 2021, there are a lot of things possible, but then it would be a little different in the outcome, in the design. But it would be possible to make for instance, a sort of sensory remote control with a little layer of cells in it. And it would be a little bit boring to watch, but it has the same fundament. So I also created a bio watch, and this is the design. And you can imagine then that you have a bowl of nutrition gel next to your bed with the bio watch in it. And in the morning, it crawls out of those bowl and gets to your wrist and says to you, "Oh, Vidu, you have to eat a little bit more jelly on your bread because your blood sugar level is a little bit low." So that could be possible because there are a lot of sensors in it, and animals have fantastic sensory cells. And if you combine them, well, what could come out of that? And this is also from the NeoBio project. I created something, and that was based on this research. We can regrow teeth. And if we put the DNA of ourselves, for instance, when you lose a tooth and you need a corone, maybe we could regrow it. And we could use something for it. So I made a teeth muscle, and we could put in it a gene combination code. And I can imagine for the future, because it's speculative design, it's designed for over 5, 10, 20 years. It would be possible. It's a little bit like science fiction, and it's a little bit over the top, but it's all based on scientific articles. And I could imagine that we can use human cells, and that there are a lot of protocols for them. In some areas, there are other rules than in other areas, but we have to watch, of course, as you can see a little bit with viruses like COVID, for instance, on a worldly level. And we have to be very cautious what we're doing with gene modification. So this is, for instance, a Russian dental group, which makes your own teeth and let it regrow in a muscle. And this is the next one, also for the NeoBio project. It is based on the brain-computer interface, and I was very interested in that research. And this is from, well, a long time ago, in 1999. But it's interesting to see when you put electronics right into a brain, for instance, of a cat, then it produces the output like this. It looks a little bit like a cat when it sees a human. That's interesting. And what kind of product would be the follow-up of that? And I can imagine that you put this living camera, because you can also buy it, of course, on the marketplace. This is a living camera made of a lot of living cells, and it watches your door. and it reproduces everything it sees, and you can plug it in and then see what comes out of it and who came to the door. And it even, because of course the advantage of this product is that it's full of sensors, and animals are very aware of little, for instance, earthquakes or little pollution levels. And it could well, it could send that information to you, and it could even learn to recognize your friends, and then it wouldn't alarm you. And this could be the inside. I made it like a real design product drawing, with a gene combination code again, and the protocol, which I can imagine, which is different in different countries, and the usage from security. And this is the 16th reference already. And this, well, it could look like this. And it's all, of course, about imagination, and it's also a little bit to provoke people about gene modification, what could come out of it, what should be careful about. But also, I think speculative design is very useful for scientists, because they have to know that what they come up with in a research could be used for other groups, and it should also be transdisciplinary every time from now on. I think if we put designers with this technique, what could come out of it? If we put sociologue people or theoretic other people, I don't know the names, but every discipline has to be commands on the new techniques, I think, because that could increase, of course, the development of all those techniques, but also we could come up with the discussion from, is this a good idea, or should we go that way? So that's a little bit Studio Daarheen, Studio that way. And this is also from the NeoBio project. I was thinking, because animals are very good at sensing pollution, could we come up with something that could react to that? And this you can see, for instance, in a foreign country where there's a lot of moist, and the windows are very, well, full of algae. What kind of products would, for instance, Google, Amazon, Elon Musk come up with? And I created a window snail. And this snail, it keeps between those copper boundaries, cleans the window, and it also is very sensitive for pollution, and it sends this information via a bioconnector, for instance, to the bio watch, which you have seen before. So these kind of products were at the Dutch Design Week exhibited to provoke the discussion. And another thing that is possible already is with CRISPR-Cas to alter the melanin pigmentation of butterfly wings. So if you think of that and you translate it to a very commercial product, yeah, what kind of products would that be? And I was thinking, wouldn't it be, well, for some horrific if you would be sitting in your lunchtime outside and there would be a butterfly coming to the flowers where you were sitting, and it would be a butterfly with a logo of a sort of brand name on the butterfly wings. Well, it could be, so it could all be created. This is from a Brazil Optics coloring, and it has a gene combination code with, well, I think this is also a butterfly. and its usages for marketing and branding. And of course, what it's all about is thinking about, is it ethical? What are the dangers? And that's, I think, also very important in every product design, not only with living cells, but when we are doing it with living cells, we have to think even harder. What could go wrong? Or do we want this way? Because when I saw what was already possible, I was very, well, I was sort of delighted. I thought, as a designer and imaginative person, oh, wow, is that already possible? It's wonderful that we can use that. And only for the second thing, I was thinking, oh, what could go wrong? So we have to think about it. And as I said before, we have to put every discipline to discuss over this, I think. Even kijken, this is another totally different project. It's the memory synthesized set, and this is from a research based on a research that is mapping the human, and I don't know if I pronounce it right, connectome. So it's mapping all the brain paths like this. And I was thinking, if this could be mapped and you could see where a memory goes, just see which way it will go. Could we come up with something, and we put it, of course, again in a computer, could we come up with something that could reproduce that exact memory, and maybe even put it in a drug? So I came up with something. This was for an exhibition, and it was about the at-home feeling. And I was thinking, maybe I could reproduce the at-home feeling for instance, if we go to Mars and we want that at-home feeling from Earth, or for immigrants, they're going to another place. Could we reproduce that exact at-home feeling with a neurobiologic drug? And we have a booster to evoke the feeling, a set of a few products, and an extractor to capture the personal brain pattern, what you saw also over here, and a translator, of course, to translate that brain pattern into chemicals, a converter to synthesize the pattern, and then into chemicals that could provoke the same path and the same feelings in our brain. So this is the memory synthesized set. And this is for another exhibition, and it's all about the contact we make with living cells, with nature. And I'm thinking, as a trend researcher and a speculative designer, that in the future we will be using furthermore living cells to create products. Maybe even in little tubes we create living products, not only as living cells like we do now with mycelium, for instance, which we use for furniture or lighting or lamps, or even clothes, but so not as a half fabricate, but the complete product. We can perhaps create a complete product. And I'm imagining it a little bit like this, that we send information digitally and have cartridges with living cells like we use now for bioprinting, and that we can, well, for instance, maybe you have worked with programs like María or 3D Max or something like that. or Photoshop. You all know the copy paste and what we can do. And maybe also for living products, we can choose, well, I want 2 hearts and I want increase this length a little bit, and the spine should be this hard, or stretch it a bit. So we can create little products with it. And that's, in my opinion, a little bit where we're going in the future. So creating living products. And this is not all fantasy. It's all based on scientific articles. So yeah, that's something to think about. And that was my participation of this talk.
Thank you very, very much, Nicole. Very interesting projects and objects, if they indeed are objects or beings or what have you. We actually have a question online from Adrian Molavin, so I will read it. So Adrian asks, how do you think this kind of art and science collaboration would impact our understanding of the relation between us, nature, and the environment? So his point is, would it increase the responsibility and care that we have on the environment, or would it just enhance the idea that, you know, man is commanding nature, and, you know, man should exploit nature as best as he can? So.
Well, I think we're right at this time in 2021 and at a sort of pivot point. We're going to an area where we are much more much more want to understand nature and take our responsibility. And we know that there could be all kinds of things wrong. And also, I see it at academies, or that the new product designers are designers which also already at the universities get in their process that we are responsible for whatever we're making. So I think with these kinds of products, and I see this not only with my speculative design, but also with other designers, that there's a huge amount of people, the new designers, which take that responsibility. And I also find it very interesting, the open source communities and the discussions over there. And what I want to stress again and again, that we have to be transdisciplinary. So the more disciplines, also the normal people on the street, the one who cuts your hair or the one who sells your shoes, they should know what could be happening just in education at schools or something, but also the product designers. I think they take this responsibility. And as we see, for instance, with Jennifer Willet, when she talked about the indigenous, I don't know if you pronounce it very well, people, the knowledge from them, that gets also much more incorporated in education right now. So I'm not very afraid that this would go out of hand. I think that if we know that this could be happening, that we could take our responsibility and it would be safe, I hope. But that's also a little.
Great, thanks. So, so just one comment on this. So, can I just put it like this? So, you know, say speculative designers are not just, you know, predicting the future and designing products according to that kind of speculation about predicting the future, but they are and should be also, their work should be also normative. I mean, in a way, this type of work is also a tool to kind of shape the future, not only to, you know, speculate about how it could be and then just work their way up to that kind of future, right?
Yes, and one of the misunderstandings of trend watching or speculative design is that we predicting something. We're not. We're making the future,
Right.
all of us. So it's just creating awareness, and that's, I think, very important.
So the responsibility is kind of embedded in the activity itself, right?
Yeah.
Great. So thank you, Nicole. I think there are no further questions. So, right, so without further ado, I'm glad to introduce the last speaker of tonight, and it's María Castellanos. María, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Well, yes, I'm an artist and researcher. I'm from Spain. And now I'm based in Norway because I just started my postdoc here at Oslo Met in the framework of FELT project, Futures of Living Technologies. And I invite you all to go through our website and join us next month in our online conference. Well, I would like to start with a short introduction about my background and how I started to work in this intersection between art, science, technology, and society. I did my PhD in the University of Vigo in Spain, focused on the enhancement of human capabilities through the creation of wearables or technological interfaces, aiming to modify or enhance our senses and capabilities. So during the last years, I've been doing this kind of stuff to think about the hybridizations between cyborgs and wearables as paradigm of the extension of human sensory capabilities. I've been also working on the creation of complex systems that promote the communication and understanding between humans and non-human beings, like plants. But in order to contextualize my work, I would like to start with a few words about the research I did in my thesis. So, the title of my thesis was Bionic Skin, Technological Membranes as Corporate Interface in the Artistic Practice. And basically, in my thesis, I tried to figure out the genealogy of these interfaces that are in between cyborgs and wearables, always from the framework of the artistic practice. And at the same time that I was working in this kind of stuff, and at the same, I was working in this kind of stuff in my artistic practice. So the images that you are seeing are part of the archive I did during my PhD. This is a digital archive which works from the fields of art, science, technology. All of them are different interfaces that you can put on your body and enhance or modify your capabilities and your senses in some way. I arranged this archive chronologically, and I realized that the genealogy of the body-world interfaces was built between the end of the 50s to the end of the 60s. So these four artists that you are saying are, from my point of view, the references for all the work that are being produced today in this specific field. Okay, it was the end of the 50s to the end of the 60s, and meanwhile this was happening in the art and design scene. In the scientific field, the term cyborg was coined by two space scientists, Manfred Klein and Nathan Klein. They describe the cyborg like a superhuman being able to survive in the space without a spacesuit. So, well, I think that wearable, from my point of view, is a mainstream term used to describe clothes that have technology incorporated. And I also think that humans create wearables because we cannot become cyborgs yet. So I like to call the stuff I do technological body-worn interfaces. And the first technological body-worn interface I created was environment dress. In 2015, when I was working in my PhD, Laboral Art Center in Spain and the company Telefónica launched a joint call to create an open source wearable from the field of art and design. I was working in my archive, and I realized that most of the wearables were measuring the quantified self. It means how many steps we do per day, our pulse, our sweat, and so on. But what happened about our environment? Does our environment affect to our mood and our behavior? The wearable devices don't use to measure environment data, but I think that of course it could affect us. So what does ideas of mind, my partner and artist Alberto Valverde and I applied to this call, and our project was selected to be developing during 4 months in the framework of an artistic residency. We arrived to the residency with just with this scheme. It's in Spain, but I'm going to translate it. We wanted to measure environmental data like temperature, light, infrared radiation, ultraviolet radiation, carbon monoxide, atmospheric pressure, humidity, noise, etc. And we wanted to geolocate this data and link this data to our mood. To the mood of the user in order to achieve a feedback with the user and the dress. And one of the conditions of the call was to create an open source work. So we put special attention in the design of all the parts because we wanted that all the people which can go into a fab lab could be able to develop this dress. So basically we used the 3D printing machine and the laser cut machine, and we decided to create a kind of set with all the sensors and actuators, and the result was that. Well, we wanted to integrate the cables as part of our aesthetic because we did not want to create a mainstream wearable in which technology are invisible. So we integrated the technology we use as part of our design because we wanted to emphasize that this technology are allowing us to enhance our capabilities and allowing us to know more about the environment and the surrounding, things that our natural senses cannot measure, or at least cannot alert us about. So this is a detail of the back of the dress where you can see the sensors integrated in this 3D printed holder. And well, we feel identified in this work. This is another detail. We feel identified in this work with the concept of fashionable cyborg coined by the professor Steve Mann, who is considered the father of the wearable computer. And well, to sum up, our dress have sensors to measure environmental data and have a GPS to save and geolocate this data. And we also develop a mobile app in order to say to the dress what is our mood in each moment. In this way, the dress can link our mood with the environmental data. And on the other hand, the dress can predict our mood. For instance, if you say that you are happy and there is a high level of UV radiation, the dress can learn that you will be happy in a sunny day. And you can set the colors of the dress according to you with your preferences. In this way, you can know when you could be happy or sad or so on. So let's see a video about the dress. And the picture you are seeing is the result of using the dress. I like to call emotional maps that of the cities with the happier places and the uncomfortable locations for the people according to the environmental data and their moods. Well, this version of Environment Dress had been nominated by the Stars Prizes in 2016. And well, we were already finished this Environment Dress, but we still had time in our residency at Laboral, so we decided to develop a second version of Environment Dress, which aimed to do performances. Well, this is the second version. This garment has the same sensors as the first one, and it measures the same data, the same environmental data, but instead of predict our mood and alert us with changes in colors in the LEDs, it reacts immediately to the environment. In other words, the garment also learns our preferences, like the first one, and reacts by closing the helmet if there is too many UV radiation and you don't like it, and activating the space in the back. For instance, if there is a crowded place and you don't like the noise, you will see the spikes in the video. Here I have some details. There is a little screen that allow me to see when the helmet is closed. And this is me during a performance in Ars Electronica. I was walking around the exhibition room with the garment, and I was also sending my mood with the mobile phone to the server. There was a screen placed in the exhibition room that allowed the public to follow the live data. Okay, and to finish with this work, I would like to show you a fragment of a video artwork created with Environment Dress. The whole video is in my website, and I just like to show you the movement of the dress. Let's see. Okay, so now I would like to speak about Chlorophylla 3.0. Chlorophylla 3.0 was the first project I did together with my partner Alberto Valverde, trying to understand a bit more about the secret language of plants. And we are very proud of this project because during the last years we have continued developing and working on new formalizations of this project. In Chlorophylla 3.0, we basically developed a sensor that allows us to measure electrical changes into plants related to the surrounding of the plant, like changes in CO2, proximity of other plants, proximity of humans, movements, etc. I mean, we are measuring these electrical oscillations that take plants into plants that changing related to this environment. The first work we developed with these sensors was a garden that you are seeing in the picture. And in this garden, we translated this data into sounds. So with our sensor, with the sensor, we can set each plant to be more sensitive, for instance, when we blowing the plant, and not for touching, etc. We recorded this video demonstration about our sensor, I will show you just a fragment because it's a bit long, but you can find it in our website. I don't know if I, oh, okay, I can move to the final of the video here. Okay, if you see the video, Alberto is setting the plant because each plant is different, and we need to set each plant to the sensor. And in this video, we did a demonstration that in which we can set the plant for different things. For instance, we don't usually use touching because I think that there is another tools to develop it, but we prefer to set the plant to be more sensitive to changes in temperature, proximity of things, or other kind of stuff. And if you see after the presentation, the video, you can see that in the last minutes of the video, Alberto is touching the cable of the plant, touching the plant, and nothing happened. But when we move the pot, the plant reacts a lot. So I go further. Okay. The next project I would like to talk about is symbiotic interaction. Some years after Chlorophylla 3.0, when we were focused in the creation of technological body-worn interfaces as part of the research I did in my thesis, we created symbiotic interaction. In this project, we used our sensor Chlorophylla 3.0 to integrate into a wearable with the aim to create a symbiotic relationship plant-human. We receive data from the plants through changes in sounds, colors, and graphics, and we also fed to the plant CO2 and water. Let's see. It was the result. Basically, it's a kind of backpack in which we place the plants in the backpack connected to the sensor. We can detect these patterns, these changes through patterns, because if you can wear this interface from a long time, you can detect these patterns in the changes in colors, in sounds, in graphics. There is a speaker here in the chest, and also in this kind of lobe, there is some graphics. And we developed two dresses. This is the second one. They works in the same way, but this second version of the dress has this little backpack to water the plants drop by drop. Here I have more details. These holders in the backpack, you can put it on, because the idea is to go for a walk with the plants, and when you arrive home, put the plants again in your home. This is the project on display. Okay, and after symbiotic interaction, we thought that our next step in our research could be to feel the plants in our body, in our skin. So it was the first idea to create the plant sense, and we developed this project thanks to a Vertigo Start residency. During the residency, we updated our first idea of creating just a wearable, and we proposed the creation of a garden in which plants were connected to our sensor, and also the wearable will be connected to the garden to feel these plants in our skin. But we also proposed some soft interfaces that will develop it in order to pick them up and feel the plants by the public in their hands. So this is the final interface we developed. If you can wear it, you can feel the plants through low frequency vibrations in your skin. And this is the soft interfaces to pick up and feel also with movements and vibrations how it's happening with the plants. This is a soft thing made with silicone because we wanted to create a thing like a living thing. This is a detail of cyborg plants that are placed also in our installation. And this is the final artwork. So here in this garden, we have 15 plants connected to sensors. And we are measuring the electrical oscillations of these 15 plants. And we are sending the data to a server, to a computer placed in the installation. And we have a feedback through these purple interfaces, through these mechanical plants, and also through the interface, through the wearable. So to sum up, all the stuff placed in the garden are moved by the real plants. Let's see a video. Okay, and now to finish, I would like to say a few words about my ongoing project, the project that I am developing here at Oslo Met, which is called Other Intelligences, Interspecies Diálogos Plants Humans. Okay, the project is an artistic research that aims to investigate the communication between plants through the use of an artificial intelligence in order to try to better understand of these living beings, nature, and try to establish a plant-human communication. Basically, I'm developing this sensor with a sensor that measures electrical oscillations in plant, but also with environmental data sensors, just to know about the reactions of the plants. It is made for changes in the environmental data. And I also place actuators in order to interact one plant with another when the artificial intelligence will be trained. This is the printed version of the sensor. And now I have 25 sensors, and I'm sending the sensor to different places in the world. Once I finish with the distribute all the sensor, I'm going to train the artificial intelligence, and hopefully the plants start to communicate each other remotely. So that's the plant connected. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, María. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. So I was struck by both. You know, I found it that your projects have like both a very poetic, let's say, function, a very aesthetic function, but it also has have a very like functional one as well. So, you know, I'm thinking about the emotional feedback dress, which maps your environment, right? And I mean, I can't imagine like real estate agent or a club owner which wouldn't want to get his or her hands on this dress just for, like, you know, marketing purposes. So that it's really wonderful that I think it has such a big potential in both, like, you know, a very, very, very functional way nowadays, and it's both like really aesthetically, you know, it opens a lot of avenues aesthetically speaking. So would you, I mean, I think, would you kind of steer your projects towards the more visual side, the more poetic-ish visual side, or would you like to steer them into the more like functional design-ish side of the
No, I think I in the poetic side. Yes, I have a background in fine arts. This is, yes, I think there is a lot of design into these things, because there is a lot of work behind the computer designing all the parts of this stuff. But I don't know. I'm in the middle, but I'm from the poetic side. Yeah.
Just one other quick question. So for the last project you've presented, there's only 2 of you working for it? Because I mean, it really sounded like a very kind of a larger type of project.
The last one.
So how many people are working for the last project you presented?
The current one?
Yes.
Okay. I developed with my partner, with Alberto, the sensor. The sensor is already working. We have 10 sensors sending data to the internet in different parts of the world. But with artificial intelligence, I be helped by the staff of Oslo Met here. The staff who's working with artificial intelligence in this university. So there is the large project we develop by the moment.
Okay, cool. So if anyone else has any question, feel free to raise his or her hand.
I only want to congratulate everybody this evening for a great presentation. Great artists, great ideas, great presentations. I clap my hands.
Yeah, we're gonna have a virtual clap. Right, so I think we're running a bit late anyway, so I think we're gonna call it a day. Not before inviting everyone to join us tomorrow for the 3rd session of the Fusion Talks. Tomorrow we're gonna try to answer, or, you know, try to sketch an answer to the question, who promotes art and science? And until then, I would like to present a performance which will be streamed after this talk is gonna end. And the performance is made by Peter Gates, aka Petru Pap, and it's called Laser Trick. So basically, thank you everyone. Thanks a lot to the speakers. I really, really enjoyed their presentations, and I hope you will join us tomorrow, and I hope we will hear from each other again, and I hope, you know, maybe we will see each other in the future, hopefully. So thank you, everyone.